Hi, I'm John Feldt, and this is the Blue Water Outlook Weekly Water Outlook for March 24th, 2013. Well, it's a bit of thunderstorm activity over the south last week. You can see these streaks here in the overall precipitation pattern. As we get into spring, we're beginning to see more convective type precipitation. That's a sign of spring. So eastern parts of Texas and a large part of Oklahoma. Now look at the difference here. This is much more winter-based type precipitation, much more uniform in coverage. So we really see here, this is very classic here, winter and spring type precipitation patterns. We're getting both these type of systems as we exit winter and head into spring. Now the east or the western part of Texas, no precipitation whatsoever over the last 7 days. Percent of normal precipitation, I think generally despite these isolated tracks of thunderstorms, you can see there in blue, the story last week across Oklahoma, Texas, and southern parts of Kansas was definitely dry, well below normal precipitation. As we got further to the east across Arkansas, you can see there was more precipitation in that region, but generally across the southern region here, it looks like a very dry week for most of the region. I wanted to step back and look at the big picture here. This is the last 90 days since, generally since December. So we get to the brunt of winter here. And I think this really clearly tells a story for water resources and precipitation across the South. What we see here are two stories here. We see this band right here, and that was one of the active snow bands through the winter months. Now, it wasn't through the entire winter months. It was sort of on and off, but that was definitely one of the areas that received heightened amount of snowfall. But the rest of the region, for the most part, especially Texas, was below normal rainfall, and that's that area of yellow and red. Now, eastern part of Oklahoma, a bit more complicated, and that's why you can see some areas above, some areas below normal, and that's because there was some precipitation, rain and snow throughout the winter months. So I think the stories so far this winter, and as we get into early spring, well below normal precipitation or below normal precipitation, an active snow band, sort of a mixed or neutral pattern over eastern Oklahoma into Arkansas. Now, because of that, you can see the drought monitor changes here. And on the left, that's early December, and on the right is the current. And basically, there's been some erosion. Now, if you look at this from far away, you probably couldn't tell a whole lot of change. We really haven't totally eliminated the drought by any means as we've gone through the winter months, and that could be concern for agriculture and ranching as we get into the spring and summer months. I'll be talking about that a lot more in my newsletter and updates over the next couple weeks and months. So we really haven't, we've put a dent in the drought, especially if you look at the Texas Panhandle due to that snow. You can see that has been reduced quite significantly, and other areas have. But keep in mind, it's not unusual to see this in the winter months, and we still have quite a bit of areas of severe and even exceptional drought over parts of Oklahoma and Texas as we exit the winter and get into spring. Now, the snow cover, there is still a bit of snow over the south. Kansas received quite a bit of snow over the weekend. And matter of fact, a storm that came through Colorado is now moving in this region right here, and it's going to expand that snowpack further to the south, push it south. So we do have some snow here in Oklahoma starting this week. Generally light amounts, a couple inches, and initially that'll stick around with the cold air, but I think by the end of the week that will be gone, and there should be no snow cover except for perhaps the northwest part of Kansas. The water equivalents of that snow are pretty wet snow, so you can see there is some welcome water in that snow, and that will be melting as well fairly quickly. That's about an inch or maybe a little bit more than an inch of water equivalent in the snow in that region. Now, last week in my briefing, if you were a listener, you might have remembered that I said the Arctic Oscillation was forecast to dip to the coldest or the most negative levels of the season, and indeed it did. Here we are right here. Look at this compared to the whole rest of the season, how much lower or negative it is. So it's definitely brought a lot of cold air, dipped that jet stream far south. And when we get that, we get precipitation patterns along those tight thermal boundaries between the cold and the warm air. So keep in mind, when we get this strong of transition into this negative phase, it does bring active weather to certain areas. Other areas are very dry and quiet. So as we get through the next week or two, the models, and these are the ensemble models in red, they're bringing us back up to pretty much neutral conditions, just a little bit negative, but I'd say much more neutral here as we round out the end of the month of March into early April. Now this is that pattern I was talking about when we get into this negative phase Arctic oscillation. This is the cold air up here, and it sags south, sags east, and then along these thermal boundaries here is where we expect the more action as far as precipitation. Now this is the cold thermal boundary, cold air here, and this is where we expect the snowstorm. And then earlier, as we had the clash between the warm and cold air, we had severe weather over the southeast U.S. For the most part, the action with this transition is going to be along the northern edge of the south here, so it's Kansas, parts of Oklahoma, and further off to the east. Pretty quiet areas over the south, such as South Texas. Now the big picture this week, fairly quiet. Early this week, that blue is the jet stream for early this week, and that's your typical negative phased Arctic oscillation, jet stream dipping south. It rises a little bit by the end of the week, a little bit more west to east flow, which will moderate temperatures. But now I looked at sources of energy embedded in this jet stream, and for the most part, it looks pretty quiet. I don't see any real active energy in the jet stream. Thus, between lack of energy and that jet stream not changing a whole lot, it looks like a fairly quiet week. These are your surface low tracks. They're all off to the east. So any surface lows that do develop will not be impacting the southern region. So here's the rainfall forecast for the next 7 days. There is a possibility of late this week into this coming weekend for more active shower and thunderstorm activity, primarily over Oklahoma, eastern Oklahoma, Arkansas, and into north central Texas. Now that's not going to be early this week. That will be next weekend as that jet stream begins to moderate. Up until that time, it looks pretty quiet. Now this is, if you can see this here, this is a climate model. I think I'm going to start showing this a little bit more, sort of merging the weekly water outlook into a little bit longer range outlooks. Generally speaking, the colder colors here, I guess, are the reds and the oranges are the below normal precipitation, and the greens and blue are above normal. And these are the next 2 weeks. And I wanted to point out this is this week, and you can sort of see mainly oranges here. So it looks like generally a dry week. Now this is a climate model, so keep in mind we're looking at this as, you know, general trends. And then this is week 2, and looks like a little bit more green. We switch around. So just from this one climate model, I guess this is hinting at, after a dry week this week, maybe a little bit more activity, especially over Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, parts of Kansas next week. And I will be keeping an eye on that to see if that does continue that trend. So the takeaway points for this week's briefing: cold early, then moderating temperatures, quiet most of the week. Next chance for precipitation, showers and storms, maybe snow on the cold northern fringes of our region for late this week into the weekend. And then, as that climate model showed, perhaps more activity on week 2. As always, I'd love to hear from you. I know it's a quiet time of the year, but we're getting close to planting, and I'd love to hear what you're doing and how you're using my briefings and what I can include in these briefings to better serve you. You can reach me at john@bluewateroutlook.com. If you like my briefings, let other people know. I'd love to get more subscribers down in the southern region. We'll be working on my newsletter this week and getting that out early in April. Until that time, I will be updating the briefing again next week. Thank you for listening.